Hi, my name is Dino, and this lecture is titled Turning a New Page in the Digital Age, Leveraging Copy-and-Paste Literacies. For those of you who are new to this concept, what exactly is copy-and-paste literacy? It is a new literacy that could emerge through copying digital content and pasting it into other contexts. From this, it's not a certainty, but it could emerge. It has become more prevalent due to the deepening penetration of the internet and analogous technology within our lives and across any type of borders. It's a global phenomenon. So because of this, the focus of this presentation is to leverage student copy-paste practices to help them develop broader literacy skills, which ideally will help them grow and bloom. A bigger context for this is the idea of the new literacies framework. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to examine copy-paste literacies from a new literacies perspective and from a new literacies framework. And what exactly is new literacies? According to Buckingham, new literacies are those forms of literacy that have been enabled through the development of digital technologies. Although this is not an absolutely necessary condition. You don't necessarily have to have digital technologies, but that's where it's normally thought of. Technology has like a paradoxical impact on literacy, like it can be both good and bad. For example, the Gutenberg press, when it started, it opened the potential for a future development later called mechanical reproduction by those of you who know Walter Benjamin. The Gutenberg press had allowed mass and cheap production and reproduction of text. And as these reproduction costs decreased and the distribution channels that they allowed became more fluid, literacy flourished, especially in the developed world, where people have a little bit more time, a little bit more financial capital, so they're able to do things like exploring literacy. In terms of, again, the paradoxical impact of technology on literacy, Benjamin's ideas concerning mechanical reproduction grew exponentially over time, especially recently in terms of our digital age. In terms of both reproduction and sharing. First, for reproduction, our seemingly ubiquitous internet connectivity allows instantaneous content reproduction. So we can take things and from the internet and produce them and reproduce them. And on a similar note, sharing has become really, really simple. You can quickly share content globally. If you know social media well and you're tuned into Twitter and things like that, you can make a topic or a form of content that can be shared globally. Previous communications constraints have been radically conflated. So back in the old days, before the internet, geography and time would stop these types of production, and sharing that can be, again, global. Digital reproduction caused a counterargument in some literacy circles to emerge, so it can be both good and bad for literacy. And the overriding question to this, in terms of not only for this presentation but beyond, is the ability to mass produce content at such an incredibly low entry point. Is it condemning digital natives, like those who have been born over the past several years and have been known digital technology in their entire lives? Has it condemned these digital natives to a life of lower literacy levels than their analog forebears? Depending on the crowd, that include me, maybe you, depending on who the audience is and their age. So there has been a shift from traditional to digital literacy. And the new literacy movement, it's a relatively recent movement, and I'll talk about a couple of different theorists. For example, Buckingham, who we talked about, Livingston, and Hobbes. Buckingham, he advocates for research that examines the affordances and complications engendered by media texts. So media has certain affordances like reproducibility, sharing, etc., which is great, but this can also cause complications, which copy-and-paste literacies is really a case of the complications. Livingston, she argues for the need to be able to, quote, read audiovisual material. And she dated this need as starting from as far back as the mid-20th century and traces its impact to the present. So, we know how to read text, anyone who's traditionally illiterate, but audiovisual material requires a literacy that's a little bit different than traditional text-based literacy. Livingston, again, she acknowledges policymakers who create regulatory frameworks that produce an ICT literate population. It gives an institutional endorsement on the importance of widespread non-traditional literacies. So because of policymakers, especially over the past decade, they have created, again, regulatory frameworks that acknowledge and allow us to produce a ICT literate population. It sort of legitimizes the idea of media literacy and digital literacy. Finally, Renee Hobbs, she states that these developments have caused tension in the educational rank and file, like teachers and administrators, for example, given the conflicting views educators have with respect to mass media and its role in formal educational environments. As you can imagine, some people think traditional mass media like television, radio, newspapers can be a boon to education, while others don't feel as strongly. And then once you fast forward to the social media age, obviously the affordances of social media and the internet are massive, and also some of the conflicts and negativities. There's a different context for copy-paste practices depending on the context where they're practiced. Copy-paste practices, they're perceived as a dichotomy depending on the context. I'll contrast positives and negatives. In a personal and social context, the ability to copy, paste, and remix content can be seen positively by many, especially friends, like when they have online chat groups and social media, when they're sharing their favorite content. This is especially true for youth who digitize and share content on YouTube, for example, or TikTok. And it's very common with youth. Obviously, I'm sure many of you have heard TikTok, if not use it. Some of the negatives, unfortunately, are different context makes appropriative traits of copy-paste seem negative. So when you appropriate content, some perceive that as negative. And it's interesting that we're talking in an educational setting, in terms of academics and legal settings and copyright settings. In terms of academics, copy-pasting digital text can be deemed plagiarism. I'm sure some of you see that when you think about or work within educational settings. Also, for a legal setting, it can be deemed a copyright infringement, so that's problematic, obviously. I'll talk about the idea of poaching and the moral arguments for appropriation. I'm going to contrast Jenkins and Diserto. Henry Jenkins, he examines appropriating text and fan writing for the Star Trek show, which I'm sure many of you Leonard Nimoy fans and William Shatner fans would know. He does this by referencing Diserto. Diserto characterizes Star Trek fan writing as poaching. Quote, far from being writers, readers are travelers. They move across lands belonging to someone else. Like nomads poaching their way across lands belonging to someone else. Like nomads poaching their way across fields they did not write, displaying the wealth of Egypt to enjoy it themselves. So here, Diserto contrasts some of the positives that the poachers get and some of the negatives that the people who had this original text might have. Further, Jenkins concludes consumption becomes production, reading becomes writing, spectator culture becomes participatory culture. So it's an interesting mixing of things. Like, again, we normally think of consumption and production being separate, reading and writing being separate. Viewing something through a spectator culture and participating is different, but copy-paste literacies have changed that. From Diserto and Jenkins, seemingly artificial distinctions between normally dialectical practices, such as consumption, production, reading, writing, and spectator participant, are reduced when fans become involved in producing transformative work like fan fiction. Copy and paste becomes more morally ambiguous than what it might initially seem. Again, and then you think about this as people toggle back and forth, it just becomes, the waters become muddy in terms of what people are doing. I'm going to talk now about 21st century approach towards appropriation. And copy and paste has been used in computer coding and created in social networks. Dan Perkel in 2006 attempts to make sense of and may justify a common practice for digital natives that is performing variations of copy pasting digital content within the context of social networks. So he tries to make sense of this practice specifically through copy paste. He focuses on MySpace, which some of you might remember. Its members reuse popular images by copying and pasting an HTML link to any image on the web. Members of MySpace, they embed video, audio, and even games in their profiles. Even companies are involved. They encourage you to copy and paste links, media, etc. across the internet. Again, the way that companies get into literacy and learning spaces is, quite a complicated issue. Copy, as many of you know, especially since MySpace that kind of fell apart. Copy-paste practices are not confined only to MySpace. Other social networks like Facebook and software such as Microsoft Word also leverage user copy-paste practices. To further some of the talk we had before, copy-paste provides skills in personal, social, and academic environments. One, computational thinking skills through visual programming languages like MIT's Scratch can develop. You can learn how to program computers through forking as per GitHub for those of you who are into computers, or code coding to achieve mastery in programming. There's also remixing of digital media. There's creating multimedia wikis. And number 5, collaborating across online learning spaces. These are some of the many ever-emerging possibilities that copy-paste can have. So as a result, there's a number of ways that copy-paste practices could help students learn. In conclusion, our perpetual online connectivity will drive copy-paste practices using web content among youth. Educators must figure out ways to introduce extracurricular learning materials to students to learn to vet materials for its information quality. And finally, copy and paste practices may be a useful way to begin having these vital discussions. That was Turning a New Page in the Digital Age, leveraging copy and paste literacies. Thanks for watching.